The student laughed as the old janitor mopped the hallway floor. "Must suck being a loser at your age," the kid sneered, walking past without a second glance. The janitor, a weathered man in his late 60s with silver hair and steady gray eyes, said nothing, just kept pushing the mop in precise, methodical strokes. 10 minutes later, the first gunshot echoed through Lincoln High School's main corridor. Students screamed, teachers shouted, panic erupted like a wildfire, and the old janitor dropped his mop, his entire demeanor transforming in an instant. His back straightened, his eyes sharpened, his hands moved with muscle memory that hadn't faded in 40 years. Because Robert Hayes wasn't just a janitor. He was a former Marine Scout sniper with 2 tours in Iraq, 3 in Afghanistan, and 87 confirmed kills. And every instinct he'd buried for the past 12 years had just come roaring back to life. Welcome to Secrets Never Told. Before we dive into this story of hidden valor and instant heroism, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from today? And if you believe that true warriors never stop protecting, hit that subscribe button. These stories save lives. Robert Hayes had worked as a janitor at Lincoln High School in Portland, Oregon for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days. Not that anyone asked, not that anyone cared. To the 1,847 students who walked these halls every day, he was invisible. Just another old guy pushing a mop, emptying trash cans, fixing broken lockers. The kind of person you never really see until something goes wrong and you need them. He arrived every morning at 5:30 a.m., a full hour before the first teachers showed up. He wore the same navy blue maintenance uniform, kept his gray hair cut military short, and never engaged in unnecessary conversation. The principal, Dr. Sharon Bennett, had hired him through a veterans employment program, but even she barely knew anything about him beyond the basics on his application. Prior military service, honorable discharge, clean background check. What Dr. Bennett didn't know was that Robert Hayes had been one of the most lethal snipers in Marine Corps history. What she didn't know was that he'd spent 15 years in Marine Force Reconnaissance, taking shots that most people couldn't imagine, in places that officially didn't exist. What she didn't know was that he'd left the service not because he wanted to, but because after his daughter died in a car accident, he couldn't hold a rifle steady anymore. The grief had broken something fundamental in him, so he'd come home to Portland, taken the only job that would give a 65-year-old veteran a chance, and spent every day working in the same school his granddaughter Emma attended, watching over her from a distance, protecting her the only way he knew how anymore. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Robert was mopping the second-floor hallway near the science lab when 3 senior boys walked past, laughing loudly about something on their phone. One of them, a football player named Derek Mitchell, deliberately kicked Robert's mop bucket, sending gray water sloshing across the freshly cleaned floor. "Oops," Derek said with a smirk. "Guess you'll have to do it again, old man." His friends laughed. Robert said nothing, just bent down, righted the bucket, and started mopping again. This was normal. This was his life now. Invisible, dismissed, tolerated, but never respected. But then Emma appeared at the end of the hallway, 16 years old, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, carrying an armload of textbooks. Robert's granddaughter. The reason he came to work every single day. She saw what had happened, saw her grandfather on his knees cleaning up water that wasn't his fault, and her expression hardened. "That was a dick move, Derek," she said sharply. Derek turned, surprised anyone had called him out. "What? You heard me. Apologize." Derek laughed. "To the janitor? Why? It's his job to clean." Emma stepped closer, her voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. "His name is Mr. Hayes, and you're going to apologize, or I'm going to make sure Coach hears about what really happened at Jenny's party last weekend." Derek's face went pale. Whatever Emma knew, it was enough. He muttered something that might have been sorry and hurried away with his friends. Emma turned to Robert, her expression softening. "You okay, Grandpa?" Robert stood slowly, his knees protesting. "I'm fine, sweetheart. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." She glanced around to make sure they were alone, then lowered her voice. "I hate how they treat you here. They have no idea who you really are." Robert managed a small smile. "That's the point. I'm just the janitor. That's all I need to be." Emma shook her head. "You were a Marine. You saved people's lives. You should tell them. Those days are over, Emma. This is my life now, and I'm okay with it." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "Now get to class before you're late." She hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but the first period bell rang. Students began flooding the hallways. Emma gave him one last look, somewhere between pride and sadness, then disappeared into the crowd. Robert watched her go, then returned to his mop. Just another invisible day in an invisible life, except it wasn't. Because at 9:47 a.m., everything changed. Robert was on the first floor, replacing a broken light fixture outside the gymnasium, when he heard the sound. 3 sharp cracks, unmistakable to anyone who'd spent time in combat. Gunfire. Not close, but not far. Somewhere on the second floor, near the East Wing. For half a second, Robert's mind tried to rationalize it. Backfiring car, construction noise, anything but what he knew it actually was. Then the screaming started. High-pitched, terrified screams echoing down the stairwell. Students running, shouting, panic spreading like wildfire through the building. Robert's body moved before his conscious mind caught up. The ladder clattered to the floor. His hand went to his belt, reaching for a sidearm that hadn't been there in 12 years. His stance shifted automatically, knees bent, weight forward, scanning for threats with eyes that suddenly saw everything in perfect tactical clarity. The fog of civilian life burned away in an instant, replaced by something cold and focused and absolutely lethal. Two students burst through the stairwell door. Both girls, maybe 14 years old. One was crying hysterically. The other was pulling her friend toward the exit. Robert grabbed the calmer one's shoulder. "How many shooters?" She stared at him, confused by the question, by the tone of his voice, which had transformed from gentle janitor to something hard and commanding. I don't know. There was a guy with a gun. He shot Mr. Peterson. There was blood." "How many shooters?" Robert repeated, his voice cutting through her panic like a blade. "One. Just one guy. He was wearing black. He had a mask." "Where?" "Second floor, near the history rooms." Robert released her. "Get outside. Now. Don't stop. Don't look back." He turned toward the stairwell. Behind him, more students were pouring out of classrooms. Teachers trying to maintain order. Someone pulling a fire alarm that added its shrill wail to the chaos. Every instinct in Robert's body screamed at him to stay down, to get out, to leave this to the police who were surely already on their way. He was 67 years old. He was a janitor. He hadn't held a weapon in over a decade. He had no authority here, no equipment, no backup. But somewhere on that second floor was a shooter, and somewhere on that second floor was Emma. Robert's hands were absolutely steady as he moved toward the stairs. No grief, no hesitation, just the cold clarity of a sniper who'd made impossible shots in impossible situations for 15 years. The muscle memory hadn't faded. It had just been waiting. He took the stairs 3 at a time, moving with a speed that would have shocked anyone who'd seen him shuffling behind a mop cart. At the second floor landing, he paused, listening. Another gunshot, closer this time, then shouting. Male voice, young, screaming something Robert couldn't make out. The hallway was chaos. Students huddled in classrooms with locked doors. A teacher, Mr. Peterson, lay motionless near a water fountain, blood pooling beneath him. Still alive, Robert noted automatically. Chest rising and falling. Survivable wound if he got help soon. But Robert couldn't help him yet. He had to stop the threat first. That was the priority, always. Stop the threat, then treat the wounded. Basic combat doctrine. The shooter was moving toward the cafeteria. Robert could track him by the sound. Heavy footsteps, angry shouting. Another gunshot, this one into a ceiling tile, clearly meant to terrify rather than kill. The shooter was young, inexperienced, emotional rather than tactical. That gave Robert an advantage. He moved down the hallway in perfect silence. Decades of training overriding every instinct that said a 67-year-old body couldn't do this anymore. He used doorways for cover, staying low, checking corners with the automatic precision of someone who'd cleared hundreds of buildings in hostile territory. In his mind, Lincoln High School had become Fallujah. The linoleum floors were desert sand. The lockers were compound walls, and the shooter was just another target. Target acquisition, range estimation, wind calculation. Except there was no rifle, no scope, no spotter, just an old man in a janitor's uniform, hunting a killer with nothing but his bare hands. Robert reached the cafeteria entrance. Through the small window in the double doors, he could see the shooter clearly now. Male, maybe 19 or 20 years old. Black tactical pants, black hoodie, ski mask covering his face. But Robert recognized the body language immediately. This wasn't a trained operator. This was a scared kid with a gun, acting out some twisted fantasy of revenge or recognition. The shooter was holding a semi-automatic pistol, sweeping it back and forth across the cafeteria, where approximately 60 students and 3 teachers were present. Teachers were huddled behind overturned tables. The kid was shouting something about respect, about being ignored, about making them all pay attention. Robert's tactical assessment took less than 3 seconds. One shooter, one handgun, possibly 15 rounds remaining depending on magazine capacity and how many he'd already fired. No body armor visible. Shooter's stance was terrible. Weight on his heels, weapon held too loosely. He was emotional, erratic, scanning too quickly to actually track targets effectively. In Marine terms, this was a soft target, but soft targets could still kill 60 innocent people if given enough time. Robert couldn't wait for police, couldn't wait for SWAT. The shooter was already escalating, already pointing the gun at specific students. Any second, he'd start executing them one by one. Robert moved, not through the cafeteria doors where the shooter would see him immediately, through the kitchen entrance on the west side. He knew every entrance, every hallway, every supply closet in this building. Being invisible meant you learned the spaces no one else paid attention to. The industrial kitchen was empty, everyone having fled when the fire alarm went off. Robert moved through it like a shadow, his footsteps absolutely silent despite the chaos elsewhere. He reached the serving window that looked out into the cafeteria. Perfect sightline. The shooter had his back partially turned, focused on the students. From this angle, Robert could see what the shooter couldn't. Emma, his granddaughter, was hiding behind an overturned table with 4 other students, her hand clamped over another girl's mouth to keep her quiet. Emma's eyes were wide with terror, but she wasn't panicking. She was watching the shooter, tracking his movements, trying to anticipate what he'd do next. Robert felt something crack inside his chest. Not fear, not panic, something colder, something that had kept him alive through 15 years of combat in the world's worst hellholes. The absolute certainty that this kid with a gun was not going to hurt his granddaughter. Not today, not ever. Robert vaulted through the serving window with a speed that defied his age, landing in a combat crouch behind the salad bar. The shooter heard the noise, started to turn, too slow. Robert was already moving, closing the distance with footwork that would have made his old drill instructors proud. Low center of gravity, knees bent, hands ready, 20 feet, 15, 10. The shooter saw him finally. This old man in a janitor's uniform rushing forward with eyes like cold steel. The kid swung his pistol around, finger on the trigger. Not fast enough. Robert hit him like a freight train. One hand clamped around the shooter's wrist, forcing the gun upward. The other hand drove into the kid's solar plexus, a perfect strike that emptied his lungs instantly. The gun fired once, the round punching harmlessly into the ceiling. Students screamed. Robert didn't hear them. He was operating on pure muscle memory now, executing a disarming technique he'd practiced 10,000 times in Marine combatives training. Twist the wrist, bend the elbow backward, apply pressure to the nerve cluster. The shooter's hand spasmed open. The gun clattered to the floor. Robert kicked it away, then took the kid down with a leg sweep that sent him crashing face first into the linoleum. In 3 seconds, it was over. The shooter lay prone, Robert's knee in his back, his arm twisted at an angle that promised immediate breaking if he struggled. The old janitor applied just enough pressure to make absolutely certain the kid understood that resistance meant pain. "Don't move," Robert said quietly. His voice was perfectly calm. No anger, no fear, just the cold professionalism of a man who'd done this before in places far more dangerous than a high school cafeteria. The shooter wheezed, trying to breathe through crushed lungs. "I can't." "You can breathe enough. Be still." Robert glanced up. 60 students and 3 teachers stared at him in absolute shock. The transformation was too sudden, too complete. One moment he'd been the old janitor they barely noticed. Now he was someone else entirely. Someone dangerous. "Is anyone hurt?" Robert called out. His voice carried command authority that made people respond automatically. One of the teachers, Mrs. Rodriguez, found her voice. "Mr. Peterson, in the hallway. He's been shot." "I saw him. Chest wound. Non-fatal if he gets treatment soon." "Anyone else?" Head shook. No other injuries. The shooter had fired wildly, terrorizing but not actually hitting anyone except Peterson. "Good." Robert looked down at the kid beneath his knee. The ski mask had come partially off, revealing a face Robert recognized. Tyler Chen, former student, expelled 6 months ago for threatening a teacher. He'd been in Emma's class before that. "Tyler," Robert said quietly, "this is over. You're done. You understand me?" Tyler was crying now, the adrenaline and bravado draining away to leave only a terrified kid who'd made the worst decision of his life. "I just wanted them to listen. They're listening now. But this is not how you get respect. This is how you destroy your entire life." In the distance, sirens wailed. Police, fire, ambulance. Help was coming, but they were still minutes away, and Robert knew better than to move until law enforcement arrived. He'd been in enough crisis situations to know that when cops burst through those doors, they'd see a man holding down another man near a gun. They'd need a moment to process, to understand. Robert needed to make absolutely certain nobody made a tragic mistake. "Everyone listen to me," he called out, his voice cutting through the shocked silence. "When police come through those doors, I need all of you on the ground. Hands visible, no sudden movements. They don't know what they're walking into, and we need to make it absolutely clear who the threat was." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded, already herding students down. Emma was still behind her overturned table, staring at her grandfather with an expression Robert couldn't quite read. Not fear, not shock, something else. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. The cafeteria doors exploded inward. "Police! Hands where we can see them!" Robert didn't move, didn't flinch, just kept his knee firmly finally planted on Tyler's back and raised his free hand slowly. "Shooter is secured," he called out clearly. "One weapon, on the floor, 6 feet to my left. One injured teacher in the hallway. Mr. Peterson, gunshot wound to the chest. All students in this room are safe." His tone was report crisp, professional, the kind of voice that told responding officers this wasn't a hostage situation. This was a secured scene. 3 officers entered in tactical formation, weapons drawn, scanning for threats. The lead officer, a woman in her 40s with sergeant stripes, took in the scene instantly. Old man in a janitor's uniform holding down a kid next to a pistol. 60 students and teachers on the floor, terrified but unharmed. "Sir, I need you to step away from the subject," the sergeant said carefully. "He's secured, but I need you to release him now." Robert nodded and slowly removed his knee from Tyler's back. The kid immediately curled into a fetal position, sobbing. 2 officers moved forward to cuff him while the sergeant kept her weapon trained on the situation. "Are you injured, sir?" she asked Robert. "No. What's your name?" "Robert Hayes. I work here. Maintenance." The sergeant's eyes narrowed slightly. Something about the way Robert moved, the way he'd controlled the situation, didn't match maintenance worker. But that was a conversation for later. "We need to clear the building," she said. "Get these students evacuated." The next 20 minutes were controlled chaos. More police arrived, SWAT teams that weren't needed anymore, paramedics who rushed to help Mr. Peterson and confirmed what Robert already knew. Survivable wound, he'd be fine. Students were evacuated in groups, parents already gathering outside the police perimeter, crying and desperate to find their children. Emma found Robert in the crowd. She grabbed him in a fierce hug, shaking. "Grandpa, I'm okay, sweetheart. You're okay. That's all that matters." She pulled back, looking at him with eyes that suddenly understood everything. All those years of quiet competence, all those times she'd wondered why her grandfather seemed different from other old men, all the stories her mother had told her about the Marine grandpa who never talked about his service. It all made sense now. "You were always protecting me," she whispered. "Weren't you? That's why you took this job." Robert's throat tightened. Every single day, they were separated by police who needed statements, needed to understand exactly what had happened. Robert was taken to a mobile command post where detectives asked him to walk through the incident step by step. He did so with precision, describing the shooter's position, his own tactical assessment, the disarming technique. The detectives exchanged glances. This wasn't typical civilian behavior. "Mr. Hayes," one detective said carefully, "your personnel file says you're former military. Marine Corps?" "Yes." "What was your MOS, your job?" Robert was quiet for a moment. Then, 0317, Scout Sniper. The detective's eyebrows rose. "How long?" 15 years. 2 tours Iraq, 3 Afghanistan. Force Recon. The pieces clicked into place for the detective. This wasn't just some old janitor who got lucky. This was a highly trained warrior who'd spent years in the world's most dangerous places. "Sir," the detective said with genuine respect, "you saved a lot of lives today." "I did my job," Robert replied simply. By evening, the story had exploded across local and national news. "School janitor stops active shooter." The videos taken by students on their phones went viral instantly. Footage of Robert vaulting through that serving window, moving with speed that defied his age. The moment of disarmament, executed with perfect precision. The calm professionalism as he held Tyler down and secured the scene. Within hours, Robert's military service was uncovered by reporters. Marine Scout Sniper, 87 confirmed kills. Multiple decorations including a Silver Star. A legend in Marine Force Recon who'd quietly retired and disappeared into civilian life. The next morning, Lincoln High School held an emergency assembly. Dr. Bennett stood at the podium, her voice shaking slightly. "Yesterday, we experienced something no school should ever face, and we're all here today because of one man's courage." Robert sat in the back of the auditorium, uncomfortable with the attention. He'd tried to avoid this, but Dr. Bennett had insisted. Emma sat next to him, her hand gripping his. "Robert Hayes has worked at this school for over 3 years," Dr. Bennett continued, "and I'm ashamed to say most of us never really saw him, never thanked him, never asked about his life. We thought we knew who he was." She paused, composing herself. "But Mr. Hayes is a decorated Marine veteran who served our country for 15 years in the most dangerous places on Earth. He came to work here not because it was a great job, but because his granddaughter attends this school and he wanted to keep her safe. He wanted to keep all of you safe." Dr. Bennett looked directly at Robert. "And yesterday, when it mattered most, he did exactly that. Without weapons, without backup, without hesitation." The auditorium erupted in applause. Students stood, teachers stood. The same kids who'd ignored him, mocked him, kicked his mop bucket, were now cheering for him with tears streaming down their faces. Robert didn't stand, didn't acknowledge the applause. He just sat there, Emma's hand in his, remembering his daughter who'd never got to see this moment, remembering all the other fights, the other missions, the other times he'd done terrible things to protect innocent people. This was different different, though. This was home. This was his granddaughter's school. This was personal in a way that combat never had been. After the assembly, students swarmed him, not mocking now, not dismissive. They wanted to shake his hand, to thank him, to apologize for how they'd treated him. Derek Mitchell, the football player who'd kicked the mop bucket, approached with tears in his eyes. "Mr. Hayes, I am so sorry for what I said, for how I treated you. You saved my life yesterday, and I was such an asshole to you." Robert looked at the kid, saw genuine remorse, saw a young man learning a hard lesson about respect and assumption. "You're a good kid, Derek," Robert said quietly. "Just remember this. You never know who someone really is. You never know what they've done, what they've survived, what they're capable of. Treat people with respect not because of what they might be, but because it's the right thing to do." Derek nodded, unable to speak. Over the following weeks, Robert's life changed in ways he hadn't expected. The school board wanted to give him a commendation. The local VFW wanted to honor him. National media wanted interviews. He declined most of it. But he did accept one thing, a full scholarship fund for Emma, established by the parents of the students he'd saved. They wanted to thank him, wanted to show gratitude. Robert tried to refuse it, but Emma made him accept. "Let them do this, Grandpa," she said. "Let them show you that they understand, that they see you now." So he did, and he kept working at Lincoln High School, still mopping floors, still fixing lockers, still invisible in many ways. But now, when students passed him in the hallways, they nodded. They said hello. They held doors. They saw him. And maybe that was enough. Because Robert Hayes had never wanted to be a hero. He just wanted to protect his granddaughter, wanted to make sure she was safe, wanted to honor his daughter's memory by keeping her child alive. And on that terrible Tuesday morning, when chaos erupted and death came stalking through the hallways, he'd done exactly that. Just an old janitor with a mop, until the moment he needed to be something else. Have you ever met someone who turned out to be so much more than they seemed? Someone whose quiet service hid extraordinary courage? Share their story in the comments below. At Secrets Never Told, we believe the most powerful protectors are often the ones who never seek recognition, who blend into the background until the moment they're needed most. And in that moment, they don't hesitate. They act.